The camera was his lawyer's suggestion, not for surveillance. The term carried suspicion, and Edward Calloway didn't feel suspicious of the woman he had hired. He felt fear, a specific, helpless kind that a father feels when his daughter cannot yet speak or tell him about her days in his absence, which is most of them. Running a company across 4 time zones doesn't pause for fear. His daughter, Iris, was 2 years old, born alongside her twin, Clara, in the early hours of a March morning that Edward would never fully recover from. Not because something went wrong, but because nothing in his life prepared him for the magnitude of his feelings when 2 small people arrived, and instantly became the most important things he had ever been responsible for. Clara walked at 14 months. Iris did not. The pediatric neurologist used careful language to explain, and Edward sat in the small chair across the desk, listening and understanding every word, yet none of them settled in a way he could manage. Iris had a condition affecting motor development on her left side. She would walk. The doctor was confident, though the timeline remained uncertain. The work ahead would be significant. The specialist recommended a pediatric physical therapist, a supportive home environment and patience, not passive waiting but active continuation. Edward hired a maid and household manager, Adwoa Okonkwo, whose references were so thorough they bordered on overwhelming. In the interview, she had looked directly at Iris in her floor seat and said hello to her before speaking to Edward, a detail Edward noticed and never forgot. She started on a Monday. The camera was installed on a Friday 2 weeks later, framed as standard practice for household staff in properties of this value. Edward agreed without enthusiasm, partly because the lawyer was right about standards, partly because his fear hadn't faded, and partly because a camera felt like something, even if that something wasn't the same as being there. He watched the footage in 15-minute segments late at night after transatlantic calls. He watched for 3 days before he saw what changed everything. Before we begin, if you believe that quiet people often do the most important work, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people today. Adwoa Kanadu was 34 and had worked in household management for 9 years, since arriving in the country at 25, with a background in early childhood education, from a university that required her to revalidate her credentials before they counted officially. A process she tackled 1 exam at a time around full-time work, and a life with narrow margins. She had 3 children aged 8, 6, and 4 who lived with her mother during the week when her schedule made logistics impossible, and she brought them home on weekends with focused, grateful energy, knowing exactly what she missed and intending to be fully present for every moment. She took the Calloway position because it paid well, and because the children needed something she recognized. Not pity, but potential that hadn't yet found its footing, something she knew how to nurture. What Edward saw on the camera on the 3rd day was this. He had expected to see Iris in her floor seat, Clara playing nearby, and Adwoa moving through the house doing her job. Instead, he saw Adwoa on the floor, kneeling, not sitting, in her uniform. On the sunlit hardwood floor of the front room, knees pressed into the wood, back straight, arms extended toward Iris, who stood upright in her small walker, gripping the handles with the concentration of someone attempting something that demanded everything. Adwoa was talking. Edward couldn't hear the words through the camera, but he read her body language, the lean forward, the complete attention, hands open and waiting not to catch Iris but to receive her. The difference was everything. The difference was the distance between someone who expected a child to fall and someone who expected her to arrive. Clara clapped beside Adwoa, not performative clapping, but the genuine, whole-body joy of a 2-year-old who hadn't yet learned to modulate delight for an audience. Iris took 3 steps, then 4, then 5. She reached Adwoa's hands and grabbed them, and Adwoa lifted her, holding her up and saying something that made Iris laugh. A laugh Edward hadn't heard before, not the small daily chuckle, but the deep, full laugh of something meaningful having happened. Clara kept clapping. Edward sat at his desk at 11:30 p.m. in a city 3 time zones away and watched his daughter take 5 steps. He covered his mouth with his hand and didn't move for a long time. He watched the next day's footage. Adwoa was on the floor again, different starting position, slightly more distance, the same open hands, the same focused attention. Iris made 6 steps, then stopped, tried again and made 4 more. He watched the day after that. 7 steps, then 8, then a sequence of 12 that ended with Iris letting go of the walker entirely for 2 seconds, standing unsupported before sitting hard on the floor and examining her hands as though they had done something surprising. Adwoa placed her hand over her heart. Clara said something to Iris in the private language of 2-year-olds. Iris laughed again. Edward booked the first available flight home. Before we continue, we want to pause here. What Adwoa did on that floor every day was visible on a camera, yet invisible to the world in the way the most important work almost always is. The channel wants you to know what had quietly shaped Adwoa into the person who knelt on that floor. There was a teacher, Mrs. Adami, who had taught Adwoa at 9 in a classroom overcrowded with students and short on books, staying after school twice a week to work with children she identified as needing more than the standard day could offer. Adwoa was one of them. Mrs. Adami never called it extra. She called it Tuesday and Thursday. Adwoa became a teacher because of her. She still knew it clearly. There was a pediatric physical therapist, Dr. Mensah, who had worked at a clinic near where Adwoa grew up and allowed her to observe sessions during a school placement year, treating her not as a student to manage but as a person to teach. Dr. Mensah once said, mid-session without pausing, "The child always knows more about what they can do than we do. Our job is to create the conditions and then get out of the way." Adwoa had written it down. She still had it. There was a neighbor, Ms. Gloria, who watched Adwoa's children on evenings when credentialing examinations fell on days that couldn't be rescheduled, doing this 17 times over 3 years, charging nothing and saying only that children needed feeding and she had a pot on anyway. Ms. Gloria never used the word sacrifice. To her, it wasn't sacrifice. It was just Tuesday. Just Thursday, just a pot on the stove. These were the people who shaped Adwoa. Those who showed up in small ways that accumulated into a person's capacity to show up for others. She didn't think of herself as carrying their legacy. She simply did on that floor what had been done for her in unnoticed rooms and afternoons. Edward landed on a Thursday afternoon. He entered through the front door at 4:00, Iris's best hour. The pediatric therapist had told him that was when her energy peaked and frustration minimized, when progress flowed best. Adwoa was on the floor, not having heard him arrive. He stood in the doorway, bag still on his shoulder, and watched. Iris was at the walker. Clara was beside Adwoa, already beginning to clap in the anticipatory way that suggested she knew what was coming. Adwoa's hands were open. Light streamed through the windows, warm and long across the hardwood floor. Iris took a step, then another, then looked up and saw her father in the doorway. Her face did that thing faces do when they see someone they've been waiting for without knowing they were waiting. She let go of the walker. She stood for 3 seconds, then took 4 steps toward him and fell into his arms, and he caught her, held her, and couldn't trust himself to speak. Adwoa sat back on her heels, her expression quiet, understanding that the moment belonged to someone else and was completely at peace with that. Clara patted Adwoa's arm in the consoling, companionable way of a 2-year-old who'd assessed the emotional situation and decided physical contact was appropriate. Adwoa smiled. Edward looked at her over Iris's shoulder. "How long has she been doing this?" "The 5 steps were day 3. We've been building since then," Adwoa replied. "You didn't tell me." "I wanted her to show you herself." "Why?" "Because the first person a child shows something to matters. She knew you were coming. Children always know." Edward was silent for a moment. "The camera," Adwoa looked at him. "I watch the footage every night." She said nothing. "I want you to know that what I saw on that camera is why I came home early and why this conversation is happening. And I want to ask you something directly." She waited. "What do you need? Not for the job, for yourself. The qualification you're working toward. The examinations, the children during the week. Tell me what removing those obstacles looks like." She looked at him, not with suspicion but with the careful attention of someone who distinguishes between performative offers and real ones. She told him. He listened the way she had listened to Iris, with full, undivided attention without filling the spaces. When she finished, he said, "I can help with most of that. Not to make it easy, to make it possible." "Those are different things." "I know," she looked at him. "Your daughter will walk without the walker by summer. I am certain of it." "I believe you." Iris had fallen asleep on his shoulder. Clara had moved to investigate something near the window requiring her full attention. Light filtered through the room as it did in late afternoons, and the house was quiet in the way houses are when something important has just concluded, and the people inside were still sitting with it. Adise rose from the floor, smoothed her uniform, and headed to start dinner. She passed Miss Gloria's number on the way through the kitchen, written on a card pinned to the board beside the refrigerator, and touched it briefly with one finger as you touch something essential. Tuesday, Thursday, a pot on the stove. The quiet work that holds the world up while nobody is watching, except sometimes someone is, and sometimes that changes everything. If this story stayed with you, please like the video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of quiet dedication, unexpected grace, and the people who show up every day without asking for recognition. Because the most important work in the world is almost always done on someone's knees, on a hardwood floor with open hands, and a child taking one more step than yesterday. Welcome to the channel. We're so glad you're here.